Warning! Tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, we're back to the detailed build series on this EL84 push-pull amp, and today we're going to wire up the input tube and the power supply and filtering that supply that tube. And this is, to me, one of the kind of trickier parts of this because we're using all the pins on the tube with the dual triodes with resistors going everywhere, and you'll kind of see it's a difficult thing to really do neat, but hey, you know, you just do what you can. So anyway, I think you're going to enjoy this part. This is probably one of the more kind of intricate parts of the build, so let's get busy. Okay, first thing we got to do is wire up the phase splitter input tube, and we need to wire up the power supply to that tube, which is going to be through a capacitor and a filter that's going to be hooked up to this tag strip. So we're going to run our high voltage DC from here to this pin on our tag strip. We're just going to take this little piece of wire here, cut that off, strip both ends, and I use 18 gauge solid core wire for all the wiring inside my amps. And I know that's overkill, but two reasons I like running this larger size wire is it stays in place when you bend it better, and it's not that big a deal when you're doing a point-to-point wired amp on having wire that's a little oversized for the amperage that you need. So, and I feel like it just helps, you know, transmit the signal better. So make sure I get this cut or stripped back to the right length. And then we're going to go from here to there. Maybe put a slight little kink in it right there. Bend these ends over. Like that. We'll hook that through there. That'll go right there. Actually, that's just a little too short. Let me cut another one. I like having a little bit of slack. I don't like pulling them tight like that, so that if the wire heats up and cools down, it doesn't like put tension on the joints. And so it's good to have a little bend in them with just a little bit of slack in them. So let's try that again. Okay, let's see how this one does. There we go. That one's got just a little bit of slack in it. And then we can bend this one over. Okay. So then while we're soldering this in down here, let's go ahead and connect the hot wire or the positive wire from our output transformer to this same terminal. Get that all connected, solder that all up at once, and then we get one more wire in our bowl of spaghetti connected to something and out of our way. Just like that. And we come in here and solder up this joint right here on the end. Just like that. Okay, so next we got to hook a 1.5K resistor from here to here. And we're going to have a capacitor here that goes to this ground point. And then this is going to be our high voltage that comes over here to our input tube. So we want to power up both of these two terminals to this terminal over here. And so we'll get this piece of wire we cut earlier that was a little too short, go across those two pins, and then over to this pin on this tag strip. So we'll come in with this little jumper wire here, across there. We'll crimp that in place. Bend this end over. Just like that. Now I'm going to push this down to the bottom of that, and I'm going to go ahead and tag these down at the lower part of these terminals, because we still need to use the upper part for the resistors. But I want to just kind of get these nailed in place so they don't move around. Like that. And there we go with those jumpers. So the next thing we're going to have is this capacitor. It's going to go across these terminals like this. And then we're going to have a resistor that goes from here to there. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of my Pliobond, and I'll put this in the description. And that's just going to kind of help keep that capacitor stabilized, so the weight of the capacitor isn't up against these leads. And like before, we're going to let this tack up just a minute, and then we'll come back. And you can see there's a little bit of glue sitting on top of this wire that had previously also glued these wires down to the chassis. That kind of helped keep them in place. And then this will hold this capacitor also to the top of the chassis. And we're going to put this in place right here. We're going to bend our leads up and then solder this guy in place. Trim off those two extra pieces. And then we have a 1.5K resistor that goes across here. We'll solder this little guy in place. And trim off our excess piece there. And then solder this little guy here in. And then we have our little filtering network that goes between the main power supply and the input tube soldered in place, as well as soldered across those two terminals. So next we need to connect the plate of one of these two triodes up to one of these two positive terminals. And I want to use this triode over here as the input, so we have the grid, which is the center pin, as close to this potentiometer as we can. So we're going to use this pin right here, pin 6. It's going to have a 75K resistor that comes over to this terminal right here. And we're going to do something like this. See about how long it needs to be. Trim this off. Then we'll get a couple little pieces of PTFE tubing over the bare parts of these leads and get this ready to solder up. Okay, so we got our resistor with the leads bent over like this with some PTFE tubing on each end. And then it's going to hook around that terminal. Get that off. And then this one. that off. I'm going to go ahead and solder this end up so it stays in place. Okay. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to hook a 100 ohm resistor from the plate of the first triode to the grid of the second triode. So we got a small 1 watt 100 ohm resistor to go across those two pins, and it's going to sit kind of like that. Let me trim this off just a little bit. And I don't want this resistor sitting down too close to the heater terminal, so we're going to stand it up a little bit. Again, I'm using some of my PTFE tubing. So we're going to cut off a couple of lengths of that. Put this little guy like this. So let me bend these ends over. Get ready to solder this guy in place. Just like that. We'll come in and solder both ends of this resistor. On this side, we're soldering both those resistors at once to this other terminal, which is pin 6 on that 12AT7 tube. So now we got the plate, and then we got the plate to the grid resistor. Let me move this over a little bit so you can see a little better. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run a jumper wire from here over to this terminal, because our two resistors and the bypass cap for the cathode are going to be over right here. So let me get a piece of jumper wire set up to put across there. So the next step here is to install this little jumper lead here across between the cathode and this end terminal down here. And I've got this bent up, and then I got this screwdriver under here kind of propping this up so it doesn't fall down while I try to solder this one end together. So let me get that soldered. Like that. Then the next piece we have is a 100 ohm resistor that's going to go between these two terminals. I can pull the screwdriver out now. And we'll solder this side here together. Like that. Then the next one we have, cut these excess off. And then the next one we have is to put a 220 ohm resistor from here to there, which is the ground. And this is the, again, this is the cathode. This is the first 100 ohm resistor. And then we have a 220 ohm, and then we're going to put the bypass cap across these two terminals. So let me get this soldered in place. And I will say that soldering these components up to this input tube is a little more tricky because we're using all the pins on this 12AT7, and we've got two triodes with a bunch of different cathode resistors and capacitors and stuff all involved in this. So, and we're working in a pretty tight place. So you just have to kind of make it as neat as you can, but it's really hard to make it perfectly neat because there's just so much going on in such a tiny little space. And then, like I said, the next is going to be the cathode bypass cap that's going to go across these two terminals. And so this little guy is going to come in here. And let's bend these leads up a little bit so it's kind of do like that little deal. And then make two little hooks like that. Make sure you've got the negative side going to the ground. Pinch those together so it'll stay together while we're trying to solder it. And then solder this little cap in place. Just like that. So now all we've got left is to hook up the grid of this triode up to the potentiometer and wire up our RCA jacks, but we can do that later. The only thing we have left to do now is put these two 24K resistors in, and I measured through a batch of them to find two that were as close to a match pair as I can. It's important that these two resistors, because they're going on each side of the phase splitter, that they're matched as close as possible to help keep from having any kind of, weird phase anomalies. So the first one is going to go between the ground and the cathode, which on this triode, that's the cathode. So we're going to have a little resistor that goes between the ground over here and that pin. Let's look, there's just barely going to be enough room to squeeze this little resistor in there, but that's fine. So solder this side in first. And come back here inside the solder this other side in. And then the last piece to this little puzzle is putting this 24K from here over to there. And I think I'm going to stand this one up like this. We got room to run our coupling capacitor from here over to that tag strip over here. So let me put a couple of pieces of short PTFE tubing on this. Then we'll put that one in place. Pull this up. Pinch that off. We'll go ahead and solder this side in of this one. So then the next little piece we have is we need to connect from here to there with our coupling cap. But I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to tag this in place just like that. And now we've got all the wiring done on our input tube and phase splitter, and we can move on to doing the wiring on the output tubes. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up this series. Probably going to have one more build video, and as you saw, we got the input tube phase splitter wired up with the power going to it, and I think the output tubes are going to be a lot easier to kind of wire up. So like I said, probably one more of these detailed videos. I know these aren't for everyone, but I had a lot of requests to do the second monoblock in a more detailed way than I did the first one, and so here it is. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please sub to the channel, please like the video, and we'll see you soon. Have a nice day.